Hi everyone, this is Professor Benjamin, and we are through week one of this course. This week you had to, so what happens is at the end of each week, I usually make a video roundup or I send out a written roundup to you. These roundups are important. They give you information for the midterm and final exams. They also give you information about the posts for the week and what my expectations are. So if you haven't had a chance yet, and it looks like a lot of you haven't had a chance to, first of all, read all of the documents under the course information session. So if you look here, under this course information session, it's absolutely essential that you read all of these documents and watch all these videos. So directions for initial posts and response posts. The reason that I have you submit a post like I did that didn't really contain to the first chapter was just to see your writing and look at how you source information. And so I've written comments back to you on all of your initial discussion posts. Many of you have a lot of work ahead of you in this semester. Lack of paragraphs, lack of the word length requirement for both initial and response posts, lack of meeting the deadlines. I want to reiterate to you that this week coming up, your initial post is due by Wednesday, your response post is due by Friday for Tragedy of the Commons. Also, this week coming up, from this point forward in this class, you will not be using any I statements in your initial posts. So I do not want to see I think, I feel, I believe, in my opinion, none of that. So you can say the same thing by not saying those words. So yes, invasive, yeah, or no, people should not have the right to bring invasive species into an area. Look, I said that. I didn't say I believe that people should have. No, no, no. You make the statement and then you give the facts to back up your statement. So moving forward from this point forward for session 2 forward, no I statements in initial posts. Also, you need to use at least the sources I have given you. So this week we have a huge document to read, which is Tragedy of the Commons by Garrett Hardin. I bet you a lot of you are going to try and skate around reading that document. You better not, because it's going to show back up on your midterm exam, and it's absolutely essential that you use pieces of that in all of the answers this week to all the posts. You could use an answer, you could use information from Tragedy of the Commons by Garrett Hardin. So it's absolutely essential that you're using sources I have given you in your post. So I don't want to see outside sources. I want to see sources I have given you to answer the questions that I have given you. Okay? So you have a quiz due by tonight, 11:59, that deals with the introduction chapter in your textbook. Now, I know a lot of you aren't able to have the textbook, but you can use the PowerPoint presentation to aid you in answering the questions on the first quiz. Okay, now coming up this week we're on session 2, which is Tragedy of the Commons. Okay, you'll see a PowerPoint here. You have additional articles to read. These additional articles actually are not related to the text, so again, you don't need the textbook this week to answer the Tragedy of the Commons forum questions. Okay, the other thing is that you notice you don't have a quiz this week because technically there's no Tragedy of the Commons chapter in the textbook. All right, so you don't have a quiz coming up, but you do have an initial post due by Wednesday and a response post due by next Friday, okay, to a fellow classmate. All right, so I just want to quickly go through these questions here. Remember, you have 6 questions to choose from. Remember, the first 6 people who answer a question, that question becomes out of play. All right, so if you think you saw a question that you really liked, you want to get in early and answer that question. Okay, so this is a podcast about the Japanese dock during the tsunami that occurred in Japan, the earthquake and tsunami that occurred that broke off and brought invasive species to the Oregon coast. So it's a great piece on invasive species. It'll give you some background information as to whether we should have invasive species or not. Remember, in this case, this isn't a Tragedy of the Commons because it was done by nature. So there was an earthquake that happened and the tsunami happened and this piece of concrete broke off and traveled across the ocean. In terms of invasive species, when they're Tragedy of the Commons, that has to do with when we want to bring something in for our own personal short-term gain. So when we look at something and say, I think this flower is so beautiful, when I go on my trip to Hawaii, I'm going to bring that back to the mainland United States, and with it you bring bugs and other things that then invade a non-native territory. Okay, so the key point there is I brought it in for my own short-term gain, not thinking of the long-term interests of society. This piece, The Tragedy of Commons by Garrett Hardin, is absolutely important. It is the backbone of every environmental problem in the world today, and that is that we share these commons, the shared space. And when we share these commons, the shared space, it is our inherent need for greed, is that humans have this inherent need to want to look for the short-term gain rather than think about the long-term interests of the common as a whole. Garrett Hardin, so he wrote this Tragedy of the Commons on a piece by William Foster Lloyd, which was written in the 1800s. And William Foster Lloyd, the big issue at the time was grazing of sheep in a pasture. And what happens is he gives that scenario, and you'll read that in the Tragedy of the Commons piece, and it's under Tragedy of the Commons, the header Tragedy of the Commons. You'll see that, where he mimics what William Foster Lloyd said, which was that there's a pasture, people want to add more sheep to the pasture, but what they don't realize is that each individual person looking for their own greed destroys the pasture as a whole. And then what happens is that forever now no one can raise sheep there because all the grass is gone. So our inherent need for greed, that short-term gain, ruins the pasture for the long-term interests. That document, Tragedy of the Commons, talks about all of the solutions, technical solutions that have been put into place to try and remedy commons issues, a welfare state, mutual corrosion. All of these things have been implemented to try and help us take care of common shared spaces. And none of them have worked. And you'll read in Garrett Hardin's piece, he says that we need an extension in morality, not a technical solution. So he says that we need something that's more than a technical solution. We need education. We need morality. We need to worry about what other things happen in the world that are happening today are going to affect future generations. So we need this extension in morality, or none of those technical solutions will work. So it's a fantastic piece, and there are a couple questions here and on your midterm exam about this piece. Okay, Asian carp video talks about the Asian carp invasion, which is an invasive species brought in to contain algae in a pond. And then what happened was in the 1990s, when the Mississippi River overflooded its banks, it brought in with it these Asian carps back, and they've taken over the Mississippi River. Here's another good article about a predator. And then here is the idea of Tragedy of the Commons in the Gulf oil spill. So, we looked for a short-term gain, which is we want cheap oil, but we forget about the long-term interests of the entire Gulf Coast when the BP oil spill occurred. Okay, so this week you should definitely be using the Garrett Hardin piece in almost all the answers, and you also should be bringing in some of the other sources I have given you to answer the questions that are posed in the forum post this week. All right, so you may see me comment, you should have brought in Garrett Hardin too, especially with the privatization question, because Garrett Hardin talks about privatization, and he talks about the problems with privatization. Because if you privatize a common, guess what? It's not a shared space anymore. Because if you privatize something, usually the person requests money for you to enter. Well, when we request money to enter, then we exclude people from entering, which is a social justice issue, but also the fact then that it's not a commons anymore. It's not a shared space. It's a restricted space. So if you're answering the question of privatization, you definitely better bring in Garrett Hardin's opinions on privatization and whether it works or doesn't work. Okay? So there's a lot going on in this session that I think you'll learn from. Okay, so remember, initial post due by Wednesday, response post due by Friday. Remember, your initial post needs to be at least 300 words, contain sources I have given you, show me where those sources are used by using in-text citations, and then MLA formatting at the ends, and then respond to a fellow classmate. Your response posts need to be at least 200 words and bring substantial content to the conversation. Okay, so I think once you get into it's like riding on a bicycle. Once you get back into the rhythm again, I think you'll improve your grades on your forum posts. Okay, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. I look forward to your posts this week.